Robert Carter had built an empire from nothing, yet every night his mansion felt painfully empty. The walls still whispered Emily's laughter, his late wife, the love of his life, gone too soon in an accident that stole both warmth and meaning from his world. He no longer lived, he only existed. Every morning he woke up to silence, every evening he worked until he could no longer feel. To everyone else, he was a powerful CEO, but to himself, he was just a man running from his own heart. His 5-year-old daughter, Luna, was the only light left in his life. She had Emily's soft curls and the same way of tilting her head when she was curious. Some nights, she would crawl into his bed, clutching her teddy bear, and whisper, "Daddy, when is Mommy coming back?" And he would freeze, unable to breathe. He would hold her tight and say softly, "She's always here, sweetheart, just not where we can see her." But after she fell asleep, he would sit in the dark, broken all over again. His assistant had begged him for months to start living again. "You're too young to let grief become your home," she'd said. When she finally arranged a blind date, Robert reluctantly agreed, mostly so she'd stop insisting. He told himself it was just dinner, nothing more. But deep inside, even the thought of meeting another woman felt like a betrayal to Emily's memory. His heart wasn't ready, and maybe never would be. That evening, he stood before the restaurant mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. The reflection staring back at him looked like a stranger. Sharp suit, tired eyes, and a sadness that no amount of success could hide. For a moment, he almost turned around and drove home. He didn't belong in a place filled with laughter and first dates. He belonged in the quiet, in the shadows of what used to be. The maitre d' guided him to a small table near the window where soft jazz played under the warm lights. And there she was, a woman with chestnut hair and a smile so gentle it made his chest ache. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice kind, familiar somehow. Robert nodded stiffly, unsure of what to say. She extended her hand with a nervous laugh. "I'm Hannah Moore. It's nice to finally meet you." Something in her eyes disarmed him, a warmth that reminded him of home, of Sunday mornings and the smell of pancakes. But that same warmth terrified him. He forced a polite smile, hoping she wouldn't notice how fast his heart was racing. She talked about her work as a preschool teacher, about how much she loved helping kids learn and laugh. Robert listened, but his mind drifted, until she mentioned one little girl's name. "Luna," she said softly. His heart skipped a beat. You're Luna's teacher?" he asked, disbelief flickering in his eyes. Hannah nodded, smiling. "Yes, she's the sweetest soul I've ever met. She talks about you all the time." Robert's throat tightened. The world suddenly felt too small, too close, too real. Memories of Luna painting Emily's old photo flooded back. And now this woman, sitting right in front of him, was part of his daughter's fragile happiness. Panic rose in his chest like a wave. He reached for his jacket, his breath shallow. "I'm sorry, Miss Moore. This was a mistake," he muttered. Hannah's smile faltered, confusion flashing in her eyes. "Did I say something wrong?" Robert shook his head, unable to look at her. "No, it's me. I can't do this." And with that, he stood up to leave, not knowing that in a few moments, one small voice would stop him in his tracks and change everything he thought he knew about love. Robert pushed open the glass door, desperate for air, for distance, for escape. His chest tightened as the cool night wind met his face, stinging like guilt. Inside the restaurant, laughter and music carried on, but he felt miles away from it all. Every step toward the exit felt like betrayal, not to Hannah, but to Emily. He told himself he wasn't ready, that it was wrong to sit across from another woman and feel anything at all. Love had been buried with his wife, and he had no right to dig it back up. Behind him, Hannah sat still at the table, watching his retreating figure through the soft haze of candlelight. She didn't chase after him, she simply exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as she whispered to herself, "Maybe he's just not ready." She didn't know his story, but she saw it in his eyes, that quiet war between grief and guilt, the kind that left scars no one else could see. Still, a part of her hoped he'd turn around. Robert reached the doorframe, his hand resting on the handle, when a tiny voice pierced through the hum of the restaurant. "Daddy!" His heart stopped. That voice, pure, innocent, and urgent. He turned around and there she was, Luna, her curls bouncing as she ran across the floor, her small shoes tapping like a heartbeat. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Luna ran straight past him and into Hannah's open arms. "Miss Moore," she squealed, hugging her tight. Hannah's eyes widened in surprise, before softening into a smile. "Luna, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" The little girl beamed, her cheeks flushed. "Aunt Grace told me Daddy was meeting someone special. I wanted to see who it was." Robert froze, every muscle locked between embarrassment and disbelief. "Luna, honey, you can't just—" But Luna didn't listen. She turned toward her father, her eyes bright and serious in that way only a child's could be. "Daddy," she said quietly, "she's like Mommy was." The room went silent. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. Robert felt the world tilt beneath him. The words hit harder than any storm. Hannah blinked, her lips parting in shock. Luna smiled, completely unaware of the weight her words carried. "Mommy used to sing with me before bed," she continued softly. "Miss Moore does that too." Robert's throat burned. He dropped to one knee, trying to steady his voice. "Luna, sweetheart," he whispered, but the words wouldn't come. All he could see was Emily's face, the way she used to hum lullabies under the same kind of soft light that now glowed around Hannah. He realized his daughter wasn't comparing, she was remembering. She saw kindness where he saw fear. She saw healing where he only saw loss. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. She placed a gentle hand on Luna's shoulder and looked up at Robert. "You don't have to stay, but maybe you shouldn't run either." Her voice wasn't pleading, it was understanding, quiet, steady, like an anchor in a storm. Robert stood there for a long time, caught between past and present, between what he lost and what might still be waiting. Then, slowly, he walked back to the table. He pulled out the chair, exhaled deeply, and sat down. Luna grinned, climbing onto his lap. "See, Daddy?" she whispered, resting her head against him. For the first time in years, Robert didn't feel haunted by the memory of Emily. He felt her blessing. Somewhere deep inside, something fragile began to stir. It wasn't love yet. It was something quieter, smaller, the very first flicker of hope. In the days that followed, something inside Robert began to shift. He still buried himself in work, but the air around him felt lighter somehow. Every morning when he dropped Luna off at preschool, he caught glimpses of Hannah, kneeling beside a child's desk, tying a shoe, laughing softly. She carried a kind of warmth that drew children toward her like sunlight. And each time Robert saw her smile, a quiet ache bloomed in his chest, the kind that wasn't painful anymore, just human. Luna came home happier than ever. She would chatter endlessly about how Miss Moore helped us paint butterflies, or how Miss Moore said my singing is beautiful like Mommy's. Robert would listen, pretending to work on his laptop, but the sound of his daughter's joy made him pause every time. For the first time in years, the house didn't echo with silence, it echoed with laughter. And in that laughter, Robert began to rediscover pieces of himself he thought had died with Emily. One Friday afternoon, when he came to pick Luna up, he found Hannah outside by the playground, kneeling beside his daughter as they planted a tiny flower in the garden bed. "It's called a forget-me-not," Hannah said. "It means someone you love is always with you." Luna looked up at her with wonder. "So if I plant this for Mommy, she'll see it?" Hannah smiled gently. I think she already does. Robert's throat tightened. He stood there silently, watching his daughter press her small hands into the soil, Hannah's guiding hers. For a moment, the scene felt almost sacred, a bridge between the life he lost and the one quietly growing before his eyes. He realized then, but Hannah wasn't just teaching Luna. She was healing her, maybe healing them both. Later that day, as he thanked her by the gate, their eyes met, just for a second. "You didn't have to stay with her that long," he said softly. Hannah shrugged, brushing the dirt from her hands. "It didn't feel like staying late," she said. "It felt right." The simplicity of her words disarmed him. No pretense, no pity, just honesty. And it terrified him how much that honesty made him want to stay longer. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more often, sometimes by chance, sometimes not. Robert began arriving early just to see Luna's face light up when she saw Hannah. Some afternoons, he'd find himself talking to her by the classroom door about small things, how Luna loved to draw, or how the weather felt like spring pretending to be summer. They weren't deep conversations, but they carried a softness that began to fill the empty spaces in his heart. One evening, after school, Luna tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "can Miss Moore come to my birthday party?" Robert hesitated, his old fear flickering like a ghost. But when he saw the hope in his daughter's eyes, he nodded. "If she wants to, sweetheart." Luna clapped her hands, grinning from ear to ear. "She'll come, I know she will." And she did. Hannah showed up with a handmade card and a cake shaped like a butterfly. Luna squealed with delight, and even Robert found himself laughing, a deep, genuine sound he hadn't heard from his own voice in years. For a moment, it didn't feel like grief or healing or fate. It just felt like life again, messy, beautiful, and real. That night, after the guests had gone and Luna had fallen asleep, Robert stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. For the first time since Emily's death, he didn't feel the ache of loss pressing on his chest. Instead, he felt gratitude for Luna, for Hannah, and for the quiet grace of second chances that had begun not with grand gestures, but with something as simple as a forget-me-not blooming in the soil. For a while, life felt almost perfect. Robert found himself smiling more, laughing more, even humming old songs while driving Luna to school. The shadows that once followed him seemed to fade, replaced by the warmth of something he didn't dare call love. Not yet. But he saw how Hannah made Luna glow, how her laughter filled every corner of their lives, and part of him began to hope again. He didn't notice how fragile that peace was until the day everything unraveled. It started with a photo, a single image that should have meant nothing. One afternoon, as Hannah comforted Luna after she tripped on the playground, another parent snapped a picture. In it, Hannah was kneeling, her arms gently around the crying child, her face filled with concern. It was innocent. But by evening, that photo was all over social media, paired with words drenched in malice. Single dad CEO caught flirting with his daughter's teacher. By morning, the whispers spread like wildfire. Parents stared when Hannah walked through the halls, teachers avoided eye contact. Robert didn't even know until his assistant handed him her phone, her expression tight. "Sir, you should see this." His stomach dropped as he scrolled through the cruel comments, each one twisting the truth into something ugly. Rage flared inside him, not just for himself, but for her, for what people were doing to someone who had done nothing but care. He drove straight to the preschool. Hannah was in the director's office, pale but composed. "It's okay, Robert," she said softly when he entered. "They just asked me to take some time off until things calm down." "Time off," he repeated, his voice shaking. "For what? For being kind to a child?" But she only smiled sadly. Sometimes kindness looks suspicious to people who don't understand it. Robert clenched his fists. "I'll fix this. I'll make a statement, call the board." But Hannah shook her head gently. "Please don't. That'll just make it worse. Let them think what they want. I'm not angry, just tired." There was no bitterness in her tone, only quiet exhaustion, the kind born from doing good in a world that punishes goodness. When he told Luna that Miss Moore wouldn't be at school for a while, her eyes widened in confusion. But why, Daddy? Did she do something bad? Robert knelt beside her. No, sweetheart, she didn't. Then why can't she come? She asked again, her little voice trembling. He couldn't answer. How do you explain cruelty to a child who still believes everyone means well? That night, he found Luna sitting by the window, drawing tiny blue flowers, forget-me-nots. She was humming softly, the same lullaby Emily used to sing. "This one's for Miss Moore," she whispered when he walked in, "so she knows I won't forget her." Her innocence shattered him. He turned away, swallowing the lump in his throat, wondering why the world seemed so eager to ruin the few people who made it better. Meanwhile, across town, Hannah sat alone in her quiet apartment. Her phone buzzed with messages, some cruel, some sympathetic, but she couldn't bear to read them. On the table lay a small crayon drawing Luna had given her, 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. Daddy, me, and you. Tears blurred her vision as she traced the lines with her fingers. "I'm sorry, Luna," she whispered into the silence. "I never meant to disappear." And as rain began to fall outside both their windows, 2 hearts, one heavy with guilt, the other with loneliness, found themselves missing the same laughter, the same child, the same fragile sense of home that had just been taken away. The storm rolled in without warning, dark clouds gathering like the thoughts in Robert's mind. He sat alone in his office long after sunset, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. His phone lay silent beside him, though he checked it 100 times, hoping to see a message from Hannah. He'd called the school, written letters to the board, even offered to speak publicly to clear her name, but Hannah refused every attempt. She didn't want to drag Luna into the noise. Some battles, she told him softly, are better fought with silence. Yet that silence was breaking him apart. At home, Luna was quieter than usual. The laughter that used to fill the house had vanished, replaced by long silences and sad drawings taped to the fridge, each one with Hannah's smiling face beside hers. "Daddy," she whispered one evening, "if people said mean things about Miss Moore, does that mean she's bad?" Robert's chest ached. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people hurt others because they don't understand them." Luna frowned. "Then we have to help them understand." He smiled faintly, thinking how much she resembled her mother, her innocence fierce, her love unshakable. That night, while Robert sat in his study, exhausted and lost in thought, the house grew too quiet. At first, he didn't notice. The rain was loud against the windows, thunder rolling far away. But when he glanced toward Luna's room, her bed was empty. The teddy bear was gone. The window stood slightly open. Panic slammed into him like a wave. "Luna," he shouted, his voice cracking. He searched every room, then the yard, then the street, but she was nowhere. His heart pounded against his ribs as he grabbed his coat and keys, racing into the storm. The streets were slick, the world blurred by rain and fear. He called her name over and over, voice raw, shoes soaked through. "She's just a little girl," his mind screamed. "She's 5. She's out there alone." Every second felt like a lifetime. He stopped at a red light, slamming his hands against the steering wheel. Then, through the downpour, he saw something. A small figure huddled on a porch, shivering, clutching a stuffed bear. His breath caught. "Luna." He pulled over, heart in his throat, and ran toward her. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "Daddy, I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I just wanted to tell Miss Moore not to be sad." Robert dropped to his knees, pulling her into his arms, his suit soaking through in seconds. "Oh, baby, you scared me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You can't just run away like that." But she only buried her face into his chest. She needed to know we still love her. Then the door behind them opened. Hannah stood there, barefoot, her eyes wide with shock. "Luna? Oh my God, Robert!"
She rushed forward, wrapping a blanket around the trembling child. For a moment, all three of them stood there under the dim porch light, a man drenched in rain, a woman trembling with worry, and a child whose love had stitched them back together. Robert looked at Hannah, his voice low, almost breaking. I was so busy protecting what I'd lost, I forgot to see what I could still have. His hand brushed against hers, rain dripping from his hair. I've been running from everything, from Emily's memory, from pain, from you. Hannah's eyes softened, tears mixing with raindrops. You don't have to run anymore, she whispered. He nodded, clutching Luna closer. I know, he said, his voice steady for the first time in years, because you both brought me home. And there, in the glow of the porch light, with thunder fading into the distance, something inside Robert finally broke open, not from grief, but from grace. It wasn't the end of their storm, but it was the first moment he stopped being afraid of the rain.
The rain had passed, but its echo lingered, in the smell of wet earth, in the quiet gratitude that filled Robert's chest. In the days that followed, he found himself thinking about that night over and over. Hannah's trembling hands as she wrapped Luna in a blanket, the way her voice cracked when she whispered, "You don't have to run anymore." For years, he had lived behind walls built from grief, but that night, something sacred had slipped through the cracks. Love, fragile and uninvited, yet undeniably real. He began to visit Hannah more often, always with Luna in tow. Sometimes they baked cookies that ended up half-burnt but full of laughter. Sometimes they sat on the couch and read stories until Luna fell asleep with her head in Hannah's lap. Robert would watch quietly from the armchair, his heart swelling with a strange mixture of awe and disbelief. How had this gentle woman, this preschool teacher with paint on her sleeves, managed to bring color back into a life he'd left in grayscale? But guilt still lingered like a shadow. One night, after putting Luna to bed, Robert opened the small velvet box that had sat untouched in his drawer since Emily's funeral. Inside was a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a heart-shaped locket. It had been Emily's favorite. He traced his thumb over the engraving on the back, "Love her like you loved me." He remembered the day she gave it to him, long before she passed. "If anything ever happens to me," she'd said, smiling through tears, "promise me you'll find someone who loves Luna like I do." He had promised, but he had never believed he could keep it. Now, standing at the mirror, he saw a man who looked older, softer, and, for the first time, at peace. The next morning, he called Hannah and asked her to meet him at Luna's school. It was the start of the new semester, and the sun shone brighter than it had in months. Hannah hesitated when she saw him walking across the courtyard, Luna's small hand in his. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked quietly. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "I've never been more sure of anything." When the ceremony ended, Robert stepped forward, the locket glinting softly in his palm. The murmurs around them faded as he held it out to her. "This belonged to Emily," he began, his voice low but steady. "She wanted me to give it to the woman who would love Luna as fiercely as she did." Hannah froze, her breath catching. "Robert, I can't accept this." But he shook his head gently. "You already have. Every time you held her hand, every time you made her laugh, every time you reminded her that love doesn't end, it changes." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes as she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. "I don't know if I can ever replace her," she whispered. Robert smiled through his own tears. "You don't have to. You're not here to replace her. You're here because she'd want us to keep living." Luna tugged on Hannah's sleeve, her little voice breaking the silence. "Mommy Emily would like you," she said innocently. "She always liked nice people." Hannah knelt, her tears falling freely now, as she hugged the girl tightly. "I think she would too," she whispered, her voice trembling. As Robert fastened the necklace gently around Hannah's neck, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over them.
For the first time in years, he felt Emily's presence not as a wound, but as a whisper, soft, loving, at peace. He looked at Hannah and Luna standing together in the morning light and realized something profound. Love wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about honoring it by daring to begin again.
The world felt different that morning, brighter, softer, alive. The air carried the scent of fresh blossoms as the preschool courtyard filled with laughter and music for the first day of the new school year. Parents chatted, teachers greeted children, and somewhere in the middle of it all stood Robert, watching Luna twirl in her new yellow dress. She looked happy again, not just smiling on the outside, but glowing from within, the way only a child who feels truly loved can. Hannah stood nearby, talking with other teachers, the silver locket glimmering faintly against her collarbone. Every time it caught a light, Robert's heart skipped. It wasn't the jewelry that moved him, it was what it symbolized. Trust, healing, continuation. Emily's love hadn't vanished, it had transformed, finding new life in the woman who now stood laughing under the morning sun. And when Hannah's eyes met his across the crowd, something unspoken passed between them, something both fragile and eternal. When the ceremony ended, Luna ran toward them, holding a small drawing she'd made. 3 stick figures stood hand in hand under a rainbow, surrounded by hearts. "That's you," she said proudly, pointing at the tall one. "That's Mommy Emily up there in the sky. And that's Miss Moore, but now she's Mommy Hannah." The simplicity of her words hit harder than any declaration could. For Luna, there was no conflict, no confusion, just love, infinite and unbroken. Robert crouched down beside her, smiling through the tears that gathered in his eyes. "That's a beautiful picture, sweetheart," he said softly. Hannah knelt beside them, her voice trembling. "Mommy Hannah, huh?" she teased gently, but her eyes glistened. Luna nodded earnestly. "You make Daddy smile again. That's what mommies do." And then, without hesitation, she threw her tiny arms around both of them. For a moment, time stood still. Robert closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of Luna pressed between them, Hannah's hand resting lightly on his. It was a simple embrace, no grand promises, no dramatic words, just the quiet certainty that, somehow, they had found their way back to love. The pain that had once defined him no longer felt like a prison. It felt like the path that had led him right here. When they pulled apart, Robert reached for Hannah's hand. "You know," he said softly, "I spent years asking why life took Emily from us, but I think now she didn't really leave. She just led us to you." Hannah's breath caught, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "You really believe that?" He nodded, "With all I am." The wind stirred then, gentle and warm, carrying with it the faintest scent of lilies, Emily's favorite. Hannah smiled through her tears. "Maybe she's listening," she whispered. Robert looked up at the sky, sunlight filtering through the clouds like a quiet blessing. "She always was," he said. As they walked hand in hand toward the car, Luna skipping ahead of them, the future no longer felt haunted or uncertain. It felt open, wide, wild, and full of life. Robert glanced at Hannah and smiled. "Ready for our second beginning?" She squeezed his hand, eyes shining. "I think it's already started." And as Luna's laughter echoed behind them, the world seemed to hum with quiet peace, a melody of loss, love, and renewal. A reminder that even after the deepest heartbreak, love finds a way home, always.